All right, so I think we'll give people another minute to log on, and I think I'm recognizing all the names today. Today we're going to be working back to the beginning of chapter 4. Hey, Stephanie, welcome. If my cat doesn't destroy the studio, man, she's going gangbusters right now. She's just zipping all over the place. So today we're going to step back to the beginning of chapter 4 and work on crown settings. And then I've got the last session's marquee in the Tumblr right now, and we'll try to set that before the day is out. I'm hoping to actually make 2 crown settings so we can do 2 of the decorative variations that John shows us. One that's just a basic crown, and one that is a cutaway where he's cut the bottom, done some filing on the bottom edge, and then reattaches the rest of the material so that it creates sort of a stepped thing. And I will confess completely, I tend to not make crowns because basic crowns are so cheap to buy that I'm going to spend money to buy a basic crown, which is part of why I want to try his fancier version, because at the heart of an awful lot of wedding bands and things like that is making your own crowns with modifications to them to get them a little fancier, whether that modification is done in a single metal or mixing the metals. That's one of the common things. So a lot of times in wedding bands in particular, it's either going to be white gold or platinum to hold the stone, and then they might want some decorative of a yellow gold or something like that. And that's just because those 2 materials are much hardier than anything else we could use. And so I dream of being able to do fancy, wonderful crown variations and so on, but I'm not there yet because it hasn't stylistically been something I've focused on, and therefore I just haven't practiced it enough. So this is going to be an interesting section. So if you are playing along at home, we are starting back at page 87, where we see a few of the crown, aka coronet settings, but we're really getting started on the heavy lift on page 88. 88, yes. And that's what I want to start out with, is talking about some of the gotchas that I found in the book that gave me a little trouble, because I've been fighting this one a little bit. Do I have any of my other introductory stuff? We have the logo is up, the recording is recording. I need to spotlight myself. Just going through my checklist because I'm very tired. And see if I can get chat to accept my paste stuff so that you can have all the links. One of the things we're going to use today is the set of prong layout diagrams that I posted to the Facebook group. So if you aren't on the Facebook group, you may want to hop on there. And let's see, I've got to just clear out a couple of the things that I am pasting because they're no longer true. Oh, come on, hang on a sec. For some reason, the chat really doesn't like it when I'm on 2 screens, so it doesn't want to let me copy paste things in easily.
Rachel, what is the Facebook group?
The Facebook group is just something I started where I could post materials, support materials, and that has sort of a guide to what I'm expecting to cover in each chapter, so that you could know the kinds of settings that we're working on. I have to confess, I owe a few updates on it. But it also has like resource links and that sort of thing. And so the Facebook group should be in that list of things that I just posted. There's multiple different lists there. The Facebook group is one of them. And big news, YouTube just added handles for everybody. Previously, you had to get to a certain level to get a unique URL. So I now have a handle that is the same as you'll find on my Instagram and on my Facebook, which is at Eclectic Nature Jewelry. Should be able to get to it from either type of link, the ones that are already there that you may have saved, but also now it's youtube.com /@ which is weird to me, Eclectic Nature Jewelry. So they've got that in their links, and I should add that to the link list when I get a chance. So yeah, the Facebook group has a guide section, which is chapter by chapter, what I expect to do in each one. That's the area that I need to go back, and I usually am good about putting dates of when we did what on them, and I have been remiss for the past month or two. And it also has resource documents that I found useful, and links, and when people post good ideas for plates, for tools and so on, we post those up there when we get a chance. The other thing that I'll remind you of is that you can use my Rio for Schools code. Since you are somebody attending one of my class-like things, if chat will let me paste it this time. Come on. And you can do this with more than one instructor's code. Oh, there we go. I did do it. So if you have multiple instructors who are giving you Rio codes, it really helps Rio out, even though you're already getting the credit for reduced prices there. It tells them what teachers are sending people their way. And I think it may actually help me stay in the program to have you guys do that. What else do I have for business at the outset? I think that's the gist. So any questions about last session's marquee, which we did with with a basket setting? So it was wireframe with sheet prongs in that case, which we templated, making them look a lot neater than the ones that we did the session before. But any questions, open issues on that one? Also okay to ask them when I pull it back out of the Tumblr and we do the setting on that. Anything? Or any open questions at all on any of our settings thus far? Okay, so let's talk crown settings first. And because I found the drawings a little challenging, I did my own grand scale version with some of the tricky parts marked out all in one. So let me get to, yes, I can see that on my screen. On page 88 towards the bottom, well, between what's on the top right and the bottom right, he's done a set of staged diagrams. There's a couple challenges with it in that he is on the top section where we're doing the measurement. He's not describing entirely what he's done for laying out the visual of the stone. And on the bottom section, while his text talks about making sure you have 3.5 times the diameter on your curve, it actually only displays 3 times the diameter. So we're going to talk about some disparities in that and where I've sort of futzed with the approach a little bit when I was doing it, because frankly, 3.5 times is a little more than you need. The drawing on the Facebook page, is that what you're asking for, Deborah? I'm seeing Deborah ask, can you post this on the Facebook page? Is that the drawing that you would like posted? Okay, I'll try to get a photo of it, but at the very least, it'll be in the YouTube video, so you can re-look at it there. So what I did is a giant scale version of the stone we're actually going to work with on our first setting today. And drew it out to imagine it multiplied up by about a factor of 10 in this situation. So the first exercise is getting your width of the stone, the diameter of the stone, and making your markers. And I find that I need a center line before I even start that. So I put my center line down and I go a line across that is the top, the tabletop of the stone. Now in his upper drawings, he doesn't have anything from the girdle on up, which is part of what was a little funky to me, because he sort of floats back and forth between talking about dimensions that are the girdle down below the girdle or the girdle down, and talking about the whole stone. So it was sort of a fudge between those two in the language, and that's what confused me a little bit. So the first thing I did was draw out the stone, which is what he wants us to do. So you're making a model of it, trace or whatever, measure, however you can best get to it, making sure that you have your coulette well defined on the center line, assuming you have a well-centered stone, of course, a well-cut stone. And then the next thing he has us measure is actually this over here, which is the total height of the stone. And that's where he sort of draws differently than he describes in the words, because he is using the measurement from the table down, but he's drawing without that girdle and table section, which confused the heck out of me. Realistically, what it's going to mean is we're going to be doing a little trimming away at the top no matter what, but I'd rather have extra up above than not. Okay, so we've made something that tells us the total height, which is table to coulette. So that's this stretch right here, right? And then we are drawing further down our line, and we're coming down to a point, and that's when we start to sketch in the profile that we're looking at. Now, it doesn't have to be a perfect profile of what you're going to do, but what it does give you is two things. It gives you a sense of the angle you want, and it gives you a sense of the height you want, because as always, we need our coulette to not be hanging out off the bottom, but in taller, right? So it's sort of what's a proportional thing. Now, in the industry as manufactured, there are generally two angles that are used for it. And I'm certain of one, which is 17%. I think the other one is 17 degrees. And I think the other one is 20, it's 17 and 23, I think are the two angles that tend to be manufactured. I'm seeing Wendy nod, so that jives with what you've learned. But that doesn't mean you have to stick with that. It's just those are probably some naturally relative to standard diamond cut angles, you know, in terms of what is being faceted in most stones. So it's a visually appealing thing. And what you'll find is if you do something sort of very limited curvature, you might go, oh, well, that's kind of ugly as a crown. It doesn't have any of the lift and elegance that the style of setting has, but it's going to depend on your stone, it's going to depend on your design, etc. I also want to mention that this, as written in the book, is only about round stones. Technically, you can make crown settings for other shapes. It's just a lot more challenging. But I'm going to show you using my punch block for finessing the shape of the setting, and you can get those in a bunch of different shapes. So when we get to that, that'll make right with a punch and the angle. This is, I think, a 17-degree block. I'm pretty sure. Yep, 17 degree. So we've sketched out, making sure we know where our end point is, and this, oops. The pencil that's not going to break on me. This is probably our most critical point on the whole drawing relative to what John does in his mapping out at the bottom of page 88, right? Because we're driving all of our curves from that point out off of that point. So even though we're only taking our setting down this far, we still continue the line down, right? So we've done our width, we've done our height, and then we've drawn beyond those dimensions in height and given ourselves the angle that we like. And at this point, I'm designing it on the assumption that I'm doing 4 prongs, but you could do 6. You can do odd numbers if you want. It's just a big pain in the butt. But that's why the other day when we were working on some prong-based things, I told you about these. And I put some of those templates up on the Facebook group and pointed you guys at the site I used to generate them. These will work well for our crown layout too. It's going to give us our points if we want to do 5 prongs or whatever. So you can play around with that, or you can do this purely with traditional measuring techniques, which we all know I love like nobody's business. So this point that we've made at the bottom of our angle that we've chosen, which in this case is probably somewhere in the vicinity of a 17 degree. This point is what becomes the pivot of our 2 curved lines. And what has thrown me on this is that this is much subtler of a curve than I was realizing. Like there's not a whole heck of a lot. It really is just back to our our junior high geometry or high school geometry, we're making the mark of the circle based on where our point starts relative to where the corner of our stone starts, and we're arching it over. And we draw beyond the point you think you need to. And then we're doing the same at whatever we consider to be the bottom of our setting, right? And so there's this teeny tiny little arc that's shown in here, a little hard to see against all the other lines. And this arc that's following here, those two arcs follow each other around. So we're taking, this is something that's been screwing me up. I need a much better quality pair of pencil dividers than I have. But basically I would be starting my point. So you start with the top one. I'm just going to do it down here because it's smaller dimensions and easier to get to, and make sure your point is always starting at the same part. And then you're describing the arc of both circles. So I've done the upper circle. Oops, sorry, I'm out of screen. I've done the upper circle, and then I've done the inner circle, again, starting at the top of the stone, and then starting where we want the crown to be ending. But it's all based off of that supercritical X. Is that making sense so far?
And what makes a better divider?
So these are, this has a couple of weird things, like the peg and lead get set at an angle outside so that they aren't actually pointing straight up and down for me when they're there, and trying to get them equidistant. So I feel like I'm lifting the one side or the other up more than I want to. So while it's this big, it's not a problem. But when I get down to tiny adjustments, I'm having a really hard time keeping it on the page to keep the clean circle. So what I want is something that has its lead embedded and straight down following the line of the material. And then yep, say again.
I said, okay, thank you. I mean, I have what, 10 or 20 of those from my mother, inherited from my mother.
Nice. I suspect engineers have some really wonderful versions of them, and that I probably got this at like an art supply store. And again, at this scale, it's doing pretty well. It's when I get down to teeny tiny that I need something with more control. You'll see how awkward it is when we do the actual modeling. Because I was doing like these fumbly fiddly things and my curves weren't curvy and so on. So again, starting with the same tip of what the lines of our angle that we've designed. That's why John has us draw out what we want it to look like, because that tells us the angle we want, gets you some nice proportions. And notice that it's going, the angles continue on beyond the 8, in this case I think representing 8 millimeters across, right? So it's 8 millimeters plus this little tiny bit that would be the whatever the angle is of our work, right? So it's straight line beyond the girdle of the stone, because that's where the stone is going to be resting, and it's going to need a little bit of lift for the prongs above it. And that was part of what I was stuck on between the upper drawing and the lower drawing on page 88, is I kept getting tangled in the fact that the picture didn't fully represent the stone to me. But once I got it, I realized that he has in fact left us material above what would be the girdle on that upper right drawing. It's just that he hasn't drawn in the top of the stone. So I've done my curve around beyond where I think I need to on each of these. And then we are doing the diameter of the stone times 3.5, right, around that circle. And this is another one that I find a little tricky, just in terms of how to think about it while on a curve. So what I did was, there's my first one, and then I just rotate and say, where do I cross? There's my second. Whoops, I'm not in picture, am I? So I've started on one, I just pivot along my curve, say, where do I touch down my second one? There's my second one, there's my third one, and then I ballpark the half, simply because if you think about it, 3.1415 blah, 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 pi is what we're really trying to ascribe here. times to get our circle. So 0.5 is actually leaving us a fair amount of extra. That accounts for two things. We're going to be cutting and filing, and we're going to be having the thickness of the metal that needs to fold into itself. So the combination of those things is why he's telling us to ballpark it to the half, I think. I'm speculating there because he uses that 0.5 on our other examples of round things elsewhere in the book. I probably am going to end up cutting that back down to more like 0.3 in my future builds, because you'll see how much extra we have to deal with. But your mileage may vary. It's still simply circle math. And plus, you could do it as the 3.1415, blah, 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 plus the thickness of your material and get there closer if you cared. And if you were working in gold, maybe that's worth it. For me, I think having the excess is always a safer bet because I can always size down rather than sizing up. Oops, I keep going out of the color area. So any questions about my scaled up ginormous version of what we're about to do teeny tiny? Hopefully that was a little useful run through of the pieces, because I've got to tell you, I've spent a few hours drawing variations on this and seeing if the tool that I gave you guys online would match the measurements that I came up with when I did it by myself on paper. And I found that met the online thing that I gave you, even in the conical template file, is not precise enough. It's only using whole millimeters. You can't do partials on a stone, and it just overscales things for what I needed. So I was hoping that would be a nice way that I could just put in my stone measurements and blammo. So I suspect I have to go digging for a better conical template. But there's our baseline. So now we're going to do it with an actual stone and scaled measurements. And what we're aiming to end up with is a paper template that becomes what will be our crown setting, right? So that's where we're headed. And we need the dimensions enough that when we rest the stone in there, it's going to just sit below the top, right? So I am going to use this sapphire, manufactured sapphire that I have because it was big and dark, and it will show on screen. And that's what we've got for a stone. Again, you're going to have a lot easier time if it's a well-cut stone, meaning that its girdle is nice and consistent and it's not an awkwardly off-center cut. So don't traumatize yourself if you're practicing these. Maybe get some well-manufactured CZs or something like that, something that Rio does that you know the scale is consistent and the faceting is consistent. But of course, we always still start by measuring it. So I'm going to do that, zeroing out my calipers. And even though I have measured this stone about 10 times at this point, we're going to check. John reminds us elsewhere in the book that you should always check from a few different positions, even on a round stone. And what I'm finding is that I have 0.01 difference from one side versus another of this stone, 0.02 it looks like. So even a well-calibrated manufactured stone can be off a little bit. And then with that close, you're going to just take an average. This is an 8mm stone as far as we're concerned. And so it is 8mm diameter. Get down a little ways. And then my height from table to culette is, this is where I get clumsy and awkward, 4.48, which I'm going to round to 4.5mm height. And that again is table to tip of culette. Okay, we'll put the stone aside for a few minutes and start working with those. So I'm going to give myself my center line and make it extra long. And then off of that, I'm going to go, because it's an 8 millimeter diameter, I'm going to go 4 millimeters to either side. It's up to you if you want to put down your 8 and then put your center line in it instead in order of operations. I found I was being more precise when I thought I mapped out based around a center line. That just gave me a little more, yes, I'm on the right track control. I want to know if anybody's invented one where you can put in the number that you want and then hit a button and it sizes your calipers to that. Somebody's got to have invented that, because it's these tiny little adjustments that always do me in. All right, so I'm going to start on one of these bigger lines just so that I have a mark point. It's 4. Same, that's my 4. So this is my 8 millimeter mark. And then I'm going to give myself my height of the stone down the center line. So 4.5 down.
It's very hard to see that your
That's too
light.
glare.
Yeah.
Is that any better?
Yeah, there.
Okay, let me see if I can darken the screen too. How's that?
I think it's okay.
It's okay. All right. So 4.5 tall is going to put my collet center right there. And then I'm going to make the drawing of the stone based off of that.
Okay.
And you can see why I did you guys up a big version of this, because this is teeny tiny little amounts, and I didn't have a bigger round stone to work with today. Okay, and then I'm going to come back down and make sure that I've drawn in my girdle, and that's the stone. Let me shade that in blue to give us a little bit of clarity on that. So that's our stone. And now I'm going to decide what kind of an angle I want. Roughly, I'm going to mock it in just to see what's going to look good. Something about that. And then I'll make it more formal by coming down to my center line from my outer edge of the stone from both sides to the same exact spot on that center line. And that's that magical X that I pointed out is so important, so critical to what we're doing, right? So now I've got what is my angle going to look like, and then I got to decide how tall I want this to be. So I'm going to go somewhere in there. So this is going to become the height of my setting, give or take. And John wants us to lay out what we think the setting will be laid out as, and what we're going to cut into it. So if I'm doing a 4-prong, it's going to look something like that. Maybe I want a little bit taller setting. You want to be careful not to make it so tall that it wants to tip. But again, we can always saw off or file off the bottom. So I'm going to just make it go to there. And this are my lines around which I'm now going to use my scribe here, which I'm blanking on the name of when it's properly named. Compass. Thank you. A compass. Words. End of a long day. So I'm going to use the compass from that magical X tip of the crossing lines. And my first pass is going to be doing the curve from that upper line, again, beyond where I think I should. And then
Rachel, could you pretend drawing it? So,
sure,
because your hand was in the way, do it one more time.
This. So I've made this
On that
arc
line to the top. Okay.
from here, from the X where the lines meet, right? All the way from the top corner around. So what you'll get in scale, if this is the top of our stone, what we're getting is something that starts here and arcs past the top of the stone. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And then the next one we're doing is using that same starting point, the critical X, and using the bottom of what we've described. And this is the one that's a little weird if you think about it, because it's going to take away material. It seems to take away material, but it's made up for in this curve. So we're still getting exactly the height we've desired by putting our mark from there. And this is where it gets tricky with this lousy quality scribe, making sure that my circle stays circular. So I've now gone well beyond on both the upper and the lower, because what I then do is I go back to getting my 8mm top dimension, the diameter of the stone. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and then the last one I need just a half. So I'm going to ballpark it right between the two. So 1, 2, 3 and a half. And then I'm going to draw that line straight in to my magical X. Okay, so this is scrap, and this is section 1, section 2, section 3 and the half. And now I have a template that I'm going to cut out, which is this, that will get me the height that I've described in my drawing. Questions before I cut this out? Okay. If you do this, I don't recommend doing it right smack dab in the middle of a page and wasting a whole page full of nice graph paper, but I wasn't thinking that far ahead. And I would say if you have time and or if you're doing a bunch of stones that are truly all calibrated to the same size, you're probably going to want to put this on some hardback paper, like a manila folder or something. And I happen to have a scrap of that here. So I think I'm going to do that once I cut it out. It just makes it that much easier to trace and repeat if you need to. Or you can just glue it straight to your piece, the paper down to your piece with some stick glue, which I thought I had right by me, but I don't. So let me go get my rubber cement, which is reasonably equivalent for sticking things to metal and so on. In this case, it's just enough to get stuck down to this backer board. Man, rubber cement has such a specific smell of, I'm in school again. It's kind of ridiculous. Okay, that tack down. And John does put an alternative method to making these besides the template version. That's the one that had me skipping this section because I was trying to figure out what I was going to be able to do on it. I do not have the hand strength to do what he describes as method 2, because what he's doing is working with straight strips of metal and bending them along their thin edge into this curve. So he shows how to do it with half round pliers, and he's literally torquing the sheet metal outward. And I've been trying to get, I just don't have the dexterity and or strength to get that to happen. But if you find that it's a good one for you, go for it. If that's easier, especially given that we're working with anywhere from 16 gauge to 20 gauge or 20 gauge to 16 gauge. That's some heavy material to have to move with your hands. So more power to you if you can. Here's another good example of if you've got good cuts from the manufacturer, you can save yourself a little cut time by putting this out on a corner somewhere. So I can get 2 of my straight cuts, which are straighter than my actual paper was cut. And just put this here. Mark it out. Bad tracing of that. And I'm going to saw this out. I'm using 20 gauge today. Again, you can go up heavier. You shouldn't probably go lighter than this unless you're working with really, really small stones. Because remember that these prongs are what's holding it in place against the stone and not much else. So it's not the same as doing a sheet metal bezel. They become, only as strong as their narrowness allows, because we're trimming a lot of material away. There's my wax. There we go. Oops, that didn't hold it off. Let's try that again. What the heck? Must have something caught in my saw blade. Bear with me. There we go. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to do standard fair sawing out. Right. And we're going to do a little filing cleanup. You guys by now know just what my love of the crossing file is. You will find that one side of or the other of your crossing file is likely to be a perfect fit. Oops, that's a very coarse crossing file. Let me get my less coarse one. Is likely to be a pretty perfect fit to this curve, which makes cleanup quite easy. And I'm going to take off any of the sawing lip that I've got chatter along the edge. And then I'll use a barrette file or a flat file to clean up the outer curve. So we now have this piece, which is 3.5 times the diameter of the stone. And we're going to shape it around into the cone. And it's going to be a rough shape right out of the gate. Get the chatter off. And you're going to probably want to make sure you've got a pretty good basic cleanup here. But once we create the cone, this should be a nice curve. I mean, excuse me, a nice straight top from the curve that we're creating. So I've got my baseline there. And he has used in the curvature of this, he's used round pliers. I imagine you could get a start with half rounds as well. But what he's actually suggesting in the text is that, especially if you have different sizes of pliers, that you find one that follows the taper you expect of your piece. So this for me is probably a good pair to start my curve. And it's a little tricky to get the grip you need. So I'm going to grab another pair of flats, not that pair though. I'm going to grab a pair of flats. to just help encourage this around. And this is how rough it is with 20 gauge. 16 gauge is going to be even tougher. I could probably do with a small annealing on this, but I'm getting there. And I may need to, given my own hand strength, I may need to encourage it with a mallet. And if you have bezel mandrel or any number of other tools, that's a good option. I do not have a round bezel mandrel. I only have, let's see, I must have a small round bezel mandrel somewhere. Yes, round, or is that oval? There we go. So I'm going to put it on something that's close to the shape I expect. And continue to work it around. Getting the angle as snug as I need it is the tricky part. So I'm getting a little overlap that I have to fight back from the angle that I started at. And I find sometimes I need to encourage one corner or another down. And maybe get it to go flatter. Follow its line a little better. Because what's happening is I'm getting a little bit of lift on one edge. So twist it because it's fighting me. I'm going to go over and anneal this just because it is fighting so hard that clearly I need a little bit of softening up on this. Do remember that once you've got it started as a cone like that, it becomes a little convection oven. So it heats up faster than you may realize. My regular tweezers. Go. Back over to the bench. Oops, back over to the bench. There we go. Cameras. See if that gets me a little bit better adjustability. These are probably too big for this end of it. Putting down my flat pliers and walking away from them. There we go. So we start to get a cone and we start to get a seam that's closing in on itself. And now would be a good time to see just how ginormous that extra half segment gets us, because it's pretty large compared to it. So I don't have it perfectly round, so it's going to be hard to fit this. But you can see that this wants to go a little further down than we might want in the setting. Like wax. Let's see, wax stop. not too much further. It's pretty close. So once we've done the sawing down and rounded it out well, we should be quite reasonably within range of what we want for a setting for this. I'm going to take the stone back out, and I'm going to get this a little bit snugger, but I'm going to cheat with this block. If you have one, great, it'll help you out. If you don't, then you're just going to keep hammering and manipulating the material against a mandrel. In this case, I'm just using this to help round it faster, because then what I can do is hammer down X on that, hammer it down to get it more centered. But then you'll see that it wants to open up because it's straightening the line that I was having trouble with. So I have to work my way further down. That's not done in this one, I think. And I may have to go back and forth between pliers and the block, in part because I probably do not have a perfect 17 degree. If this were 17, if I had cut mine, patterned mine to 17 degrees, it would probably be a nice snug closed fit, but I think I must have a steeper angle. Let me get this closed up this way. I'm trying to make sure I don't distort top to bottom, which is its inclination when it's trying to open up, meaning it's not torquing, the height is staying consistent. But look how pretty that is with a template. You know, we got first shot out, we got the same height on both sides. We got it looking conical pretty much right out of the gate. Nice and straightforward. So what I'm doing now is just trying to get a closer fit before I take the saw to it, because I want it really, really snug. So all I'm doing is trimming down the line. And it'll also be easier on me to do the final sizing of it back in the block once it's soldered together and doesn't want to keep fighting the angle. So I'm going to take the saw blade at this point, plenty of wax on there, and I'm just cutting down the seam, same as I would for a ring or anything else that I want a nice snug fit on. Then I'm going to close that up again. And if you feel that it's still a little oversized, you can always go back and forth and do a few passes of closing it up, sawing it, closing it up, sawing it, because that saw is just acting as a file in this case. It's filing a clean line between the two of them, between the two walls, or two sides rather. I just want to see how we're doing once I round it again. Snug fit on the wall, snuggy-ish, that needs a little cleaning up. And you can see as I get it more round, you can see how much excess I have. And that's really because of that 0.5 instead of 3.1415 plus dimensions of the metal. So this is gonna be
Excess at the top or excess going around?
excess at the top. I've got it is a wider bezel than I needed it to be. So I'm going to keep taking a little bit more material off and try to, so that the smaller I make the upper cone or the whole cone, the higher up the stone will sit in the cone. So what I'm seeing here, let me see if I can draw this for you guys. because it's got that excess, what I'm getting is, here's my cone. And the stone is sitting sort of down here. And as I trim, the stone will be forced up. As I get this smaller and tighter, the stone will be forced up, because obviously it's only going to hit at whatever point of the cone is that perfect setting for the 8mm girdle, right? So I'm just trying to, I'm seeing it so far down that I would have to chop a fair amount off. Now I can make it that way. I can plan for that excess and just give myself the extra height, but it's going to be harder for me to get precision if I'm making multiples of these, if I don't really get a routine down. And this is partially why I think personally I'm going to switch to doing 0.3 instead of 0.5 for that extra little tab of material that we're adding. But I'm going to play around with that. Again, your mileage may vary. Decide how well it's fitting compared to what you expect it to. And really that's about finding the routine so that you're at least consistent from setting to setting, and you know how much material you're going to have to cut or file away. It'll also be modified based on how thick the material is, because part of that excess is accounting for the thickness of the walls. So in this case, I'm just going to do a couple more passes of filing through to size it down a smidge. Because each pass is going to get it a little bit smaller, but not make a radical leap on the curve. And this is going to be a healthier way to do this than trying to cut it off of one side or the other, because it's going to be harder to get a clean height relationship. Like if you just take it off of one side, you're going to have to very precisely follow that angle of the curve. I mean, excuse me, it has to have a perpendicular cut to where we started our pattern if you're trying to cut an entire slice away, as opposed to this act of equally sawing both sides should work it down a smidge at a time for us. That's a very technical term, I know, a smidge. Just coming off of that one.
Rachel,
Yeah.
when you're done with that, can you show us again? I don't think I've ever used a compass. I'm trying to
Okay.
make it, I think, I mean, I have like 5 of them in front of me. So I have them.
Yeah.
But I keep on getting a circle. I don't get that like long like you had.
So you should be getting a circle, because you're just, all that a compass is doing is describing a segment of the circle. So it should, like if you don't have a compass and you have good circle templates, you could put the circle, if you had a perfect circle that fit from the point and bypassed the points that you care about, it's just hard to get a series of exact circles when you do that, right? Because you don't always have the exact right dimensions of your circle. So I will happily show it again, and I think we're going to do a second one of these depending on the time, so that I can do the cutaway version. So I'll have a whole nother run of it on a separate setting. All right, I think I am feeling good about soldering this together. Worst case is if it's still too big after you've done the solder, remember you can always cut down your solder line and keep cleaning it up. But I'm going to get us there knowing that I'm not trying to perfectly match two settings. So I'm not too worried if I'm a little smaller of a setting than I thought. I am using hard solder on this.
So you wouldn't just solder it together and then do a figure 8 on top of sandpaper to bring it down?
Figure 8 on top. Oh, you mean the height of it?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm going to be doing in this case. But if I were trying for a precise height and I just didn't have my stone resting high enough, then I would
Mhm.
I'd need to continue trimming it down. What the trimming is doing is getting clear of the excess from the 0.5 to bring it back down to a truly the circle at the height we wanted. I'm saying that badly. Let me see if I can figure out a better way to say it. Oops, that's not where I wanted that solder to flow. Hang on a sec, let me get past the soldering bit and then I'll try to articulate that again. Oh my goodness, I'm getting solder all over the place on this puppy, except where I need it to go. Let me quench this because it's opening for me. Gotta take some of that excess solder off before I try this again. So, yes, I can always, that's what I was saying about you could just always plan your bezel to be taller using the measurements that we set up initially and account for the fact that you're going to trim some of it away. But in this case, I was trying to get it closer to what I intended the height to be. So I was trying to avoid taking a height off if I could. And instead I'm taking walls down my latch. Sorry, I just put enormous amounts of blobby solder on here and I want to take some of it off before I put it back together. And part of that was because I was watching too many things go on and didn't get a snug enough fit on the seam. So it wasn't flowing where it was supposed to. Just tightening up that seam one more time. Let's try that again. Fresh solder. And one of the things that I always have to remember about this setting that John makes clear, and it was another thing that felt counter to what I had previously learned, is that we're going to do most of our cutaway on the seam. So we're going to start one of our inner filing activities, the castellations that we're making on the seam itself, so that as little of the solder seam is in the piece by the time we're done as possible, which I think is a really nifty concept. Remember what I'm doing now that I didn't do on the last pass was that we're trying to heat from opposite the seam so that the heat helps push the seam closer together in the silver. Try that again, this time with feeling. Get the solder to run where, oh geez. It is leaping off the spot I want it on. It's going to be one of those not a good day for soldering days. Wow, this is completely not doing its thing. All right, bear with me, gang. I'm going to do another pass of cutting away, see if I can get a cleaner fit. Maybe I got oil from the blade on it or something. Get it cleaned. Either that or I used up my mojo for soldering this week. My class. I'm gonna toss this in the pickle just to get it extra clean. All right, while that is pickling for a few moments, got any questions to throw my way? Nothing. Okay. I'm going to start while we wait for that one. I'm going to start marking up the template for the other ones so that you guys can see that exercise again. And this one I'm going to make a little taller than the last one.
Because
Because this is the one that I'm going to put the cutaway on the bottom as well as the top. So it's one of the, you'll see on page 91, at the very bottom in section 6, he shows a version where he's sliced off the bottom and done some filing on the bottom half and then solders the bottom ring back on, which is the kind of thing that really appeals to me. Any of these ones that don't have that added decorative element are kind of like, I can buy that. So I want to do one that's a little more exciting. So again, from my perspective, I like to start by making my center line. I can do this on a pad of paper so that it's not so rough. There's.
did you want to switch camera angles or?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Yep. So I'm going to start with that center line. And then I'm going to choose my other stone. Go. This one is, I believe, a 9mm, but I'm going to recheck because it's been a while since I measured it. Please remembering to zero out. Yep. And this one's pretty nicely calibrated. So we've got a 9mm diameter. And then 5.64 from table to left. Okay, so 4.5 from the center for my 9mm. Zero out again. Oh, I had it. So finicky. All right, so I'm going to go 4.5, 4.5. This is my diameter here at the top of the stone, and then 5.64. That's my coulette. So the stone is going to be like this. Right, and then I'm going to design the angle that I want on the setting. That's a little steep. and coming at it from both sides to the same crossover point, what is becoming that magical little X that we care about. So here's our magic spot, right? And then how tall do I want it? Somewhere in there, I think, because what I'm going to be doing is putting some detailing from above. I'm going to have a ring and some detailing from below, probably alternate from where we're setting the other cuts. So I'll probably do something like that, right? So that we're cut away there, and we've got that extra little footer there. So this is going to be my total height of the setting that I'm making in this round. And now I go back and use those, the compass. Can figure out where I buried the compass under everything that's on my bench. There we go. Okay, so again, starting at the magic X, and I'm using the point. So a good compass is going to have one that's a standing still, spike it into something point, and the other is going to be a hopefully better than mine, pencil lead, right? And so I'm putting it in there and opening it out to the upper size, which is right where the top of the stone hits that 8, or in this case, 9 millimeter diameter that I set up. And I'm spinning while keeping this point on the X. So if I were to spin all the way around, yes, it's absolutely going to create a whole circle for me, right? That's what it's doing, is I'm pivoting. Let me see if I can bring this down. I'm gonna get you guys wobbly for a second. Bear with me. So I've got my point and I'm spinning the compass past it, right? This point that's stuck in stays where it is, and I pivot from there. Then I'm doing the same thing closed in to the bottom of where I want my design to be. So it's going to create what would be a whole other circle just inside, the dimensions of which are consistent between those two. So in that magical X point, that's what I'm cutting past at top and bottom of what will be the bottom of the setting. Not all the way down. I just have to continue that line in order to get my angle to create the difference. Did that help? Okay, I'm going to go back up to the overview so you guys can actually look down at what I'm doing. All right, and now my last step is to do the 3.5 times the diameter, which in this case, I'm just stick walking the compass, leaving each point down before I go to the next point, and that's where I split it in half. So this is 1, 2, 3.5, right? And then this line, this mark that I made my half on, goes again back to the magic X. It's all about every line has to follow back to that, because all we're doing is we're creating I think they're called radians of the circle that all want to go at the same angle relative to that center of the circle. Okay. So again, I now have a template in here that is that 3 and roughly 1/2 times the size of the diameter. This little guy out. And once you start having fun with these, try, make the bottom ring out of brass or copper or gold if you're that kind of spontaneous. So when we design this, oops, I've got way more material than I need because I failed to cut off the other side. So when we actually build this, I could make another piece in gold or something and put it as the detail. Nothing says I can't do multiple layers of that filing and cutting. That's what you'll see in some of the fancier stuff. Again, if you haven't looked at John Mazzaro's Instagram and you want to watch some of the most beautiful tiny little settings, the man can saw anything. And so don't be frustrated when you watch his stuff because it's amazing. He does not answer questions about how he does things, but he does really great jobs with the showing us pictures of the in progress things. And you'll see him doing multi-layered, you know, he'll build a little intricate sort of viney thing and set it inside of the rest of the setting and frame that in something else. It's Mezaros, I believe, John Mazzaros. If anybody finds that on Instagram and wants to post it to chat, that would be great. Ooh, Deborah, I would love to see the drafting or engineering compasses, which look a lot nicer to use. That sounds fabulous. Okay, so this is my 9mm template, which again, I can put it down on something cardboardy so that it's a little easier to work with. And then let me just toss that down. Okay, and the nice thing about this is if you've done your little sketch, the way that John encourages us to do as the how do we start this thing, then you're going to have on your template, what are you expecting to do in the next phase where we get into the filing away of material. So don't toss your template once you've used it to cut the basic sheet metal. Hang on to it. Okay, so that's going to become my next one. This is just for size differential, 8mm stone with no extension on it, 9mm stone with a little bit more material so that we can do that cutaway. And you can see how they differ from one another. Do this so you can see the difference, following their arcs for their own sizing. All right, let me get this out of the pickle and then see where we stand because I need to get it soldered in order to get to the next steps. This is good. This bezel right now is half solder, so we got to take care of a little of that. Thank you for the Mazzaros, John. Thank you for posting that, Helen. Let's get rid of some of this ungodly amount of solder that I've now put on the piece. Because the solder is definitely going to get in the way of any filing or prong pushover that we're going to need to do at a later stage. And that's partially why John has us about to file on top of the seam to take away material, because then our actual push down prong portion isn't on a seam line. It's on one of the in-betweens, one of the little U's or valleys where we're cutting away. Okay, I want to hammer this a little more snugly in so that it is tight, tight, tight now that it's clean. I can't see the light through it. That's got to be tight enough to solder. I'm going to actually set this up on a pair of nickels just to see if getting some air under there is going to help make this flow a little bit more. The conical, I mean, this is literally the shape that is used when one makes, say, a glory hole for working glass. It's to get the heat and the smoke drawing away. And so it's really just building a little convection oven in there when it heats up. So heating more from the back at first. And a little bit of solder. Oh my God, today is going to do me in. All the way soldered? No. Wow. Guys, I apologize. It is definitely not a soldering day.
Is your gas high enough?
It is. It's very hot and it's a fairly new tank, so it's not under burning. This is the fault of the user at this point. Wow. It's getting too dirty. Let's see if I can get it from the inside instead. That did the trick, but it is sloppy, sloppy. Oof. Okay, that's going back in the pickle while we cut the other one. You know, days that aren't soldering days are definitely hammering days, so I may have to hit some stuff after this session. All right, so we're gonna meanwhile cut out of the 20 gauge again.
Don't hit the cat.
Oh, say again?
I said, if you're gonna hit something, don't hit the cat.
No, she would not put up with that. Let's see. Corner, follow that same little tidbit there. Here's my Sharpie. Okay. A little bit more sawing. Okay. Get this cleaned up around the edges, getting all the chatter off. Again, I'm not too worried about a perfect finish. I just want to take care of anything that could get in the way of soldering and shaping or hurt me because it's sharp. Got a little bit of a bad edge from the one that I sawed. Love that crossing file just to clean things up. Okay, we're back to shaping on something roughly the conical dimensions you're headed for. Trying to keep your ends heading towards one another. This one being a little bigger, I have a little more material to grip, so it's getting the curve by hand a little more. Bring my block over and see if that'll help straighten this a little bit. I don't fully understand why bezel blocks are as expensive as they are. The answer is probably because they can. But I would really love to have a full set of shapes. Right now I only have square and round because I found deals on both of them. They're absurdly expensive. Just flying. It's being difficult right in the center. It's not wanting to widen out as neatly as it does at the ends. When in doubt, hammer it harder. Still hammer it harder. I'm going to anneal this and then I'm going to swap out for the other one while it's pickling. All right. Back to the bench with number 1.
So Rachel,
Yeah,
do you think that's how they do the bolo tips?
you could do a conical bolo tip this way, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the principle of making a cone is you're making a cone. So this is one of the easiest layouts that you can do. You just probably would run it all the way down to the point, except for a tiny little opening enough to make the metal be able to be rounded. But it's certainly one of the ways you could get to a bolo. Okay, now that it's soldered, I'm gonna actually go a little bit bigger first. Now that it's soldered, I'm going to get it rounder from the block because that will make it nice and even in a way that I can't by hand. But again, if need be, you put it on a regular mandrel of some sort, a ring mandrel or something. So we're getting there. I just have to get all of this god awful solder off of here. Man, the solder is also doing a weird wrinkly thing. I've had a couple of bad batches of solder through the years. One in particular that would just crumble after use. It must have had too much of something in it. But I don't think I've seen it in any of my materials, so I can't blame the materials. I think this is just me not hitting the heat in the right place as I do it today. Okay, so John specifically says don't take all of the solder down from inside. But what I do want to do at this point is now that we've got it well rounded, I want to see where my stone rests. So this is definitely still lower in than I had designed it, right? I was intending it to be up a little higher, which means I could have taken more material down with that sawing and shaping thing. Or again, I'm going to probably just start using a little less than the half segment that he's suggesting so that I'm a little closer to my actual expectations. But I also have plenty of room for below, so I'm not worried about where this is going to land. It just means a lot more cutting off of material for me up at the top or sanding and filing. And I'm looking pretty good. What I really like about this is the cone is even going up the sides. It's following the angle of the template, right? And I'm going to have, once I clean it up a little bit, I'm going to have a nice flattened bottom. And my top is okay, except for a little bit where I was hitting it with the solder and it got a little lumpy. So my next step on this is now to clean up the top and bottom, which I'm going to do on my usual sanding sheet, unless I have a whole lot to take down. Sanding is going to be one of the easiest ways. And this is a, go in coarse. Do I have any water over here? I'm just going to dunk it, drip. So I'm just doing 320 to start. Oops, I'm not in screen, am I? Man, I have way too much stuff on my bench right now. Scoot that over. There we go. 300. Come here. I'm starting with my 300. Just because the whole purpose of this particular sand is to take material down. And we all have patterns that we don't realize when we're sanding. So don't forget to sort of rotate it every once in a while, change your direction. Don't always just go back and forth because you'll end up doing one side less than the other. So what I'm looking for is a nice clean top surface like that, and ditto on the bottom. So they're a little harder to hold. And it may be, if it's small enough, it may be easier to file. This one I think is probably going to be easier to hit with a file. And it's just a little too small to hold where I want to hold it. And I'm a little loath to put this in a ring clamp or something after I got such a nice roundness to it. I'm just going to work it on the file for now. Right, and I'm going to take a round file to the inside lip, or you could also use a small crossing file. Oops, that's 2 fourths. I just want to take down a little bit of the roughness that I've added in by doing that filing I just did, sanding and filing. So I'm just cleaning out the inside a little bit, taking that down, and then I'm gonna go around the edge, top and bottom, to take any chatter off that I've introduced from the coarse filing that I was coarse sanding and filing I've been doing. So top and bottom, taking a little of that off, just to give it a clean lip. And on the inside, again, I tend to go on something like this to my crossing file just to clean up that lip that comes in. Okay, so I now have a cone that should be nice and upright and even from every direction that I look at it. Even angles, top and bottom, height, everything is nice and clean. And I'm in good shape to go to marking it out for cutaways. So I'm going to go to my chart of nicely, neatly laid out things because I have that. And I'm going to first mark where is my seam, because John wants us putting one of the cutaways on that seam, which you're going to have to center it to get it where we want, but is going to naturally mean that we have another one dead opposite it. And then north, south, east, west. And I'm going to rough mark them, but then I'm going to go back in and use something like a square. Here's my square. All right. I'm not allowed to do more work until I actually clean my bench a little bit. So I'm just going to take the square and make sure I've got a fairly straight line going up and down at each of my 4 quadrants. Tricky because it's got the seam, the solder line. I don't like how that one is marked up, so I'm going to get rid of a little of that. Yep, I totally wrecked those. Let me try that again completely. If you have a circle template that has more closely laid out rings, which I may somewhere, but oh, there it is. Oh, that doesn't have rings. You may find that there's like a clear plastic template that you can get that has concentric circles, which will make this exercise easier. I'm going to always start the first one on the solder seam. And then one opposite it.
Rachel,
Yeah.
I forgot where did you put the solder, in the inside or outside?
I ended up having to do a little of each because it was not hitting when I went from the outside. So what I really did was when I started was I put it right at the top of the cone and tried to draw it down the seam, but it was fighting me hard. So I ended up putting it on its side and putting some interior to it and getting that to flow.
Gotcha.
So the answer is I didn't do it well. I did what it what it was reacting to.
But does it really matter where you put it? I mean, you're gonna cut it anyway.
As long as you get it to flow. This was just fighting me so hard when I was doing it the way that I would normally solder that I had to play a little bit. Okay, so now, depending on your precision factor, you either are going to draw in what you want to cut away, or you're going to, better still, measure some precise marks that we're going to take away from either side of the piece. So what I'm going to do is start myself down at 0 and then decide how far I want. I think I want sort of, yeah, I want to leave more away than prong. So I'm going to go with,
Can you put some light on it, Rachel?
oh yeah,
Just-
here, let me brighten this up again. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. For some reason, the new light that I got from Fordham is really wreaking havoc with this camera. I'm gonna have to play around and see if I can swap cameras or something. So what I'm aiming for is to get myself something that is equidistant on either side of the line that I've marked for my, so I've marked my 4 quadrants that I'm going to be using as the center of what I cut away. And I'm going to start on my seam line, which is that one. And I think I'm going to go with 2.2 millimeters. I can always take more away. But again, this is going to be about your design aesthetic combined with how much prong you need to hold the stone. The bigger the stone, the wider you may want your prongs, or the heavier. You can fix that 2 ways. You can go with a heavier material, or you can go with a wider prong, or both. Okay, so I'm going to mark from my mark line in the center of each. I'm going to mark a 2.2 starting point and see how that looks. So what I'll be taking away is going to be this part. Oops, I forgot a critical step. I did not make my mark line around to say where I was going to stop my cut. I needed to do something decisive all the way around the work. So let's actually put a black line. Let's see that. So making a circle around from the bottom. And then what I'm making is the line that tells me where I want to stop filing, like how much material I want left below the stone. So I'm just giving myself that halfway divide line, and I'll decide if I want to go lower once I see how it looks. So I'm going to cut away that much. And then so the blue is what I'm taking away. I need to take a little more because this is going to leave fairly wide prongs, but we'll see. And again, you could do a masking tape around this and mark it out flat if that's easier for you. This is the stuff that guys like John Mazzaros and so on, they just do like they're breathing, it seems. They just know the dimensions they want and mark it out and are done with it.
But they have made hundreds or maybe
Right. Yeah. After a while, it becomes instinct to your brain, the proportions and so on. So you can see I'm going to be getting this is anything that's silver is going to be the upright of the crown. So that's not a terribly appealing curve to me. I think I'm going to try and get it a little curvier, not so angled as I had. And this is, again, just a base guide for me to follow so that I'm making my prongs the same widths between things. And I can see already that that is not happening on one of them. Oh, that's why, because I haven't gone wide enough on this one. Okay, so I've got it roughed in. And now on page, he's doing these cuts. So on page 91, he shows you marking out. Oh, he's done marking at the top. That's what he does. So he carefully marks out. He scores all of his marks along the top rim, which makes a whole lot more sense. And then make sure that you've got the same dimensions between each segment. So if this is I'm taking away. But we're going to be cutting the just inside of our intended line. And then we're going to do the rest with filing. So I'm going to start this. One of my lines. Oh. Actually, I'm going to do opposite sides. I don't think he specifies, but I'm going to do opposite sides to each other just to make sure that I've got good proportions before I go further. He just says to cut them out, I think. Oh my goodness, this lip does not want to catch with this saw blade. So. I don't know if you guys can hear it through the miking, but there's a family of barred owls that lives outside my property. Goes looking for mates outside of my property. So there's some really cool hooting noises going on outside my window. Too wide on that one.
And Rachel,
Yep.
I have on page 91, I've underlined step number 4.
Yes.
Use a fine saw blade to remove.
No, you're right. I'm probably still stuck with what I was cutting out my shears with, my piece with. Good call. Yeah, this is a 2/0. I should be dropping down. Thank you for that. Of course, that's why I'm catching. I'm all the way down to a 7/0. I need to fill in my fine blade mix. See if that makes my life easier. Probably will. The big thing for me is finding a grip position that I'm not either cutting my fingers or cutting the opposite side. We have to cut in at a bit of an angle to follow this. Thank you for that, Wendy. Good call.
Well, and you know, he says use a shellac stick, but that takes
Yeah,
too
I
much
can't,
time.
I really can't get my fingers in if there's a stick below me. This is definitely tricky to get the angle against the curve and against the shape you're trying to hit. Yeah, there's a saw blade. See how many of these 7/0 I go through. Oh, man. Maybe too fine a saw blade choice. I don't think I have anything in between my 2s and my 7s right now, though. So again, I'm cutting just shy of where, oh geez. All right, gang, I gotta see if I have anything else. I'm not doing it with the 7s. Oh, I have 5s, excellent. 5/0, see if that'll survive. So I'm cutting in inside of the line that I'm going to end with once I finish all my filing and everything, leaving myself plenty of leeway because it's going to be a lot easier to shape the last of it with the files than it is with the saw, as you are finding with me fumbling everywhere here. There we go. I know this part is as exciting as watching paint dry for you guys, but it is part of what we're going through on these. Okay, there's one. The other side, opposite it. Oh, man, gang, I don't think I'm gonna make it to 2 today. We'll see.
You're tired,
I am, apparently.
taking your vitamins?
Pardon?
Are you taking your vitamins?
I am taking my vitamin. I am. It was just a long day at the day job. Okay, that's really not very cleanly cleaned out. I'm gonna actually I think I'm gonna do neatening of these two opposite each other first, and then balance out the other two, just because I can see how unequal my cuts are right now. I want to clean them up with the files before I do much more. So, Jesus. So what I've got is I've cut away a chunk on each side. I'm now going to go in and use a series of files. In this case, John, I don't think gives us specifics. He just says needle files. So it's going to depend in part on the shape you want. I'm going to start out with a round file. Find mine. Just to rough it in down that line. But again, these could be V's, these could be straight cuts. The round with it sort of angling outward is one of the more traditional looks for these. Just watching that I don't go too low for the line that I marked all the way around the bottom.
I can see this being done with a cylinder burst. Or
Yeah,
cross-
absolutely. If you've got the
Yeah.
hand control for it. Cylinder burr, I mean, if you, so again, John Mazzaros, you watch his shots, and he's literally using his saw in such precision that he's almost done, and all he's doing is touch-up work with his files by the time he's finished cutting them out. So it's hand control, precision, you know, and some of it is the effect you're looking for, whether you want it to have that angled look. So it quickly starts to look like something fancier when you start to get that bevel. It's kind of cool how it evolves through this. Just make sure you've got your bottom line measurement so you're not going over where you want to be. I'm gonna have to do a lot of cleanup with the flat file, or barrette. In this case, I'll use a barrette on the sides of my cut line because it was so sloppy. Oops, that's not the barrette, it's the barrette. So I'm just cutting in along this angle that I'm going for. Get something a little more consistent from wall to wall. And so this is really just carving away material until you get to the look you're going after, keeping in mind that you still need the functionality of the prong factor. But in fact, for example, this is an I mean, once it's cleaned up all the way, this is an acceptable setting as is. You can push over from the wraparound, so you can do the 2 prongs because it really actually counts as 4 points of hold down at least. So that's not a terrible way to go if you've got a really interesting pass-through look for the stone. In this case, we're going to go with the more traditional 4 prongs. Not quite low enough on this one. Drawing flats. So here's our first pass. There's obviously still some more cleanup where we're starting to get the first 2 of the 4 notches. There's definitely some cleanup on that side. And you can see it's starting to have that look of a crown-like thing. Let me get the stone and see what it looks like with the stone in place. So we can start to sense how far down that stone is going to be resting. So yeah, I can go way further down on my cuts because this is so much deeper in. And I think I'm going to want to show a little bit more, not way deeper. So this is just about where the girdle is going to sit, because remember, we're also going to be cutting in our prongs a little bit so that they fit into the walls, just like we do when we're doing the prong settings. We do a little cut in on each prong. So this is going to rest a little bit lower than it is right now. So I probably want to take the line down a little bit, for a little bit lower to get that castle effect further down, or else I'm not going to actually end up with much curvature to it. So let me take that those first two down further. And this is just a back and forth between your various files until you get the profile that you're looking for out of it. Again, you'll get a different look if you use triangle files in there than if you use the round like I'm doing. You'll get another effect altogether if you go square and try to put something that's very boxy in there. As long as you have enough material to hold the stone, you're in good shape. And the rest is decor. And because I've been sort of half measuring, half just working to what looks good, I'm going to need to at some point recheck my measurements for the rest of it and even things out a little bit if I need to. So, for example, looks like I have a smidge more material on one side than the other, which means I didn't do a very good job of centering. Literally a smidge, it looks like. So, not even half a millimeter, give or take. So I got to take a little bit more off of the wider side before I center things on the other side.
I don't know, Rachel, this seems to be very hard on your fingers.
This one is, yeah, just because I'm doing a lot of pinching to hold it in place. But again, John talks about setting it in pitch or something. I just find I need to have a lot more like moving it around and so on than I get when I'm in a pitch. Because then I'm sort of one dimension is always stuck on me.
Yeah, it's messy.
Pardon?
It's also messy.
It is, although I kind of like the smell of good pitch. It just sort of feels like, you know, you're working. There's something about it that says I'm making stuff out of metal. And it must have been some of my earliest recollections of the smells from the studio, because that and the pink wax that is hard to find these days are two of the strongest scent memories I have around metalsmithing. I'm going to go to a finer grade of round file, if I can find it, because it's a little too snug. And what I really, really like on these is this angled cut that gives kind of a facet in. I don't know if that's showing well enough on the camera for you guys. I'll bring it over to the good camera in a sec. So rather than a straight across cut at the bottom, I'm doing a little bit of angling in to get this effect. And also I happen to be doing it into a sort of V, but you don't have to. You could do these more straight up and down. Let me bring that over to the detail camera. Let's see if we can zoom in so you can see what we're headed towards. Oop, too soon. Come on. There we go. So what I'm talking about when I'm angling is this nice little cut in that happens when you do when you file at this angle instead of across it, right? So I'm getting just a shallow little groove at the bottom of these arches, and that's the kind of detail that I find on the crown settings makes them more elegant, is to have that little cut in, and then I'm making the sidewalls a little flatter. So I'm going to keep at this. Any questions while I'm continuing to mark and file? Okay, it looks like I'm back to being bright again though. Let me darken this a little bit, see if that helps you guys on screen. There we go, that's a little better. All right, so now I'm going to check my cross measurements to get rid of the saw blade bits. Still a little off between them. Okay, I've got to take a little more from this bigger side. So this is my fault for not doing a more meticulous job of centering. I'm trying to correct it before I go and position the other two prong divides. Again, unless you're doing something super fancy with it, this is a lot of work for something that is also quite easily manufactured. But if you want it to be by hand, or if you're going to do the version where we take material away and put it back in either different metal or just with detailing below it, then it's worth doing by hand because you can get your own custom pieces. I also know folks who will spend a lot of time making a really perfect setting like this and then have them cast. Nothing says you can't take your perfect model and make it repeatable. Hitting my seam.
Well, I'm just dumbfounded that John makes it a 4-word sentence.
A 4-word sentence.
Sculpt the base with a saw and file, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely gave us more explicit details in some of the earlier settings over this. Yeah, this is interesting. So I've got a little blip in the matrix on this metal, which may explain why I was having trouble soldering if the sheet metal has some defect in it. So I'm coming across what is essentially an air pocket in the sheet metal, but not where I was seaming things. So I've got a little bit of material I got to take away just to get past that. It may just have been a mediocre batch of sheet. It's really weird that I've ever run across something like that. But it's also part of the reason that I don't make my own sheet. I'm more likely to have bad sheet if I make it than if I buy it from a manufacturer that makes miles of it all the time.
I just ran across that problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had all this scrap, and instead of sending it in, I melted it and I made some disc and put it through the rolling mill, and then I ended up with pockets.
Yep.
And on some of the pieces, I didn't know I had pockets until I
Mhm.
constructed it into something.
Yep.
And then it's bad.
Yeah. Again, that's why I pay the pros to make my sheet. I'll roll sheet up and down, down in size, but I don't want to cast and make it myself. More power to the people who do, and especially people who are working in gold where every scrap bit counts. That's good enough for government work. We are now. Oh, I'm also going to true up the rounding on this a little bit because I've been manhandling it so much that may be part of why it's looking a little out of sorts.
Carmen, did you forge that billet after you cast it?
What do you mean forge? Like
Did
hammer
you
it?
beat it with a hammer before you rolled it out?
Yeah, hit it with a hammer to
Mm,
align the crystalline structure.
Probably not.
So that's an
I just-
important step. Because as Wendy was saying, what you're doing with that is breaking up the big crystals that are formed when you make it all molten. And that means that it won't it's like rolling harder material into the Play-Doh. If you've got, dried bits is the equivalent. If you've ever worked with Play-Doh or that's dried out, or clay that's got dried out bits. So that's what
a
you're
great
doing.
analogy.
Yeah. I used to do ceramics too at one point in my life. I just haven't had time for it. I've always wanted to get back to throwing, even if I don't actually save the pots I make. I really like the act of throwing. It's very meditative. Okay, so we're at 7.39 versus, I think that's as good as I'm getting right now. So now my goal is I'm going to find my center points for each of these. So 3.41.
So are you saying that when you melt it, you have to hammer it before you roll it?
Yeah, you're supposed
Okay.
to take one of the the 2-pound hammers and then hit it on one side and kind of form it into a cube, a long cube. What is that called? A rectangle.
Okay. I'll have to remember that. Thank you.
Jim Binion and Chris Plouffe might have some videos of that hammering approach, because you have to do it in Mokame Gane build too. All right, so now what I'm going to try and do is make equivalent cuts to what I've already done here. Off of center, so 2 point. I say. So that's going to make my prongs very thin. I did not do a good job of measuring these to start, gang. Oh, because I'm doing half, not full. I'm being dense. No, I'm not. I overdid it. 4 points. This is going to be this is my bad first example, I can tell. Because I've made my side ones too wide for the proportions I've got. So this is going to be the yuck factor one, and I'll try to recuperate on the next one, which I think will hold for a day when I actually have better control over things. Otherwise, you guys are just going to sit here and watch me do bad filing.
Well,
That's fine.
maybe Rachel, I'm not quite sure why you remeasured. What were you doing there?
So because I cut further down than I expected, I ended up widening this more than I meant to. And I
Okay,
didn't, and that threw off my proportions. So I have wider gap here than I can afford to have along here.
okay,
So
yeah.
my prongs will get to be nubs of nothing if I cut all the same width. So I'm gonna do this on the fly. I sort of rough and ready, get us similar so you guys can see the effect of having the full set of prongs. But then I'm gonna do it cleaner on another version. And we'll see whether I think I'll probably have to get that other one done when I'm in more control, and I'll save the cutaway of the underneath for our next session, so that you guys can see that act.
But you like the 5/0 better than the 7/0, huh?
I do. I think my 7/0 are from I often pick up antique tool collections. And I haven't found a whole lot of places selling higher than 6/0 unless you're buying large quantities. I think Pepe is now doing it with their nanos. But I suspect my 7/0 are probably 40 or 50 years old, given the way that I collect those sorts of things. So I have a pile of like still handwritten notation of what size they are, saw blades. And I think my 7s are from that collection.
Yeah, Pepe's has
going
up to
8.
yeah.
Yeah, they go to they go to 8/0, don't they? I think they have
Yes.
Yeah, I just
high
ordered
as
some 8.
8/0. And I very intentionally only bought parts of the set because I had so many saw blades, but I think it may be time to invest in some of the finer ones.
I really like the nano blades.
Do you?
Yeah, I used
I
to
wish
use the
I had-
Hercules,
Yeah, I used to use the Hercules Gold.
but
like
I
them
started
now.
using the nanos and for piercing and stuff, and
Yeah.
I really like them.
Good to know. I got some of them. I got, 2/0 I go through like butter. And so I got a few 2/0 and a couple other sizes that I needed to fill gaps, but. So this would be another one of those things I should have learned from our last situation where we did a template. This would not be a bad thing to draw a single tab template to the proportions, or even lay it out specifically on the cutaway template that we just made, to get more precision than I have been getting successfully, to get more successful precision than I have been getting. As I started with my little circle layout device, but I certainly went far afield from that. So if I had committed harder to a single size of cutaway, I think I'd be in better shape right now.
You mean like not
Say
have
again?
you mean like not have filed down so much?
So certainly not have filed down as much, but more to the point that if I had a layout pattern on paper before I started marking this out, it would have made my life easier. Because I'm especially when I'm trying to show you guys, so I'm holding things at angles I normally wouldn't, or I'm rushing things that I really should just slow the hell down on. It means I'm doing screwy measurements. You can see this is a little off center. So because I went so wide here, I had to go narrower here. So my prongs are a little bit more out to the edges than I would like. Even once I file this, I think I'm going to be able to make it look a little closer to squared. But I should have taken my little attached to the cardboard template and laid out, where is that template? I should have laid out precisely where I was going to put my divot portions,
Okay.
and then marked it out in tape or something, or in clearer Sharpie, to get myself there. So let me just do a quick little file on to this one so we can start to get the sense of it. And we
But
will
this-
see what mess I have wrought today.
Rachel, but hadn't you already decided how you were gonna shape it?
I did. So the shaping, yes, I had only roughed in the kind of curve I was going to put in each gap. And so I needed to be a little more precise and use it. That was the big thing. I instead tried marking it out by hand based on the 4 quadrants, the north, south, east, west.
I
So
see.
rather than using my template and making it more precise, I was trying to draw it on. So my advice is actually make the template and use it. Which is a lesson that maybe by the end of this book, I will have finally embraced, gang, because clearly things work better with templates.
Yeah, yes, I guess, but you have to be committed from the beginning.
You do, yes. And that's part of it, is that I changed my mind about how deep I wanted to go on the cuts. And, so I've been mocking adjusting the mock-up even. So for example, this is a relatively nice angle cut. I think that's probably about where I would have been initially, but I went too wide because I was going deeper and cut too wide. So
yeah, I got it.
yeah. So this was an I'm being fast and sloppy instead of taking the time to do it right. And as we know,
But that's
if
when
we
you're
skip
doing just
steps-
what I'd be doing. So
well, then I'm glad I could model for you a way to do it. I'm just not going to be doing the recommended way. And again, another approach is grab a piece of masking tape and wrap it fully around your piece, cut it open and lie it flat, mark up the tape with equidistant mapping. And the thing you just have to remember is that one of these divots, one of the down low leg segments is what needs to be over your solder line. So when you line it back up, make sure that's where it lands.
What was the last thing you said? I didn't understand.
That no matter what you're doing, whether you're templating or whether you're measuring it out, John wants us putting one of these cutaways. Our seam should be on the bottom of that line. He doesn't want a seam running down
Oh,
the
got it.
actual prong, because that makes it hard to put down.
Right.
And stiff
Thank you.
compared
Yeah.
to the others. Yeah. So however you pattern, keep that in mind, because that can be a little tricky when you've got something well laid out to get it lined back up with that seam line. And this is the kind of project where I really feel there are computer aids for these, for some standard sizes. I'm going to keep digging for technology that lets us lay out a perfect template. And so that as long as you have a size that you can put in, you know you're working with 8mm calibrated stones, and you want it to be, 12mm tall or whatever, that you can mark it up in a computer program and print out your template, so that you have something more consistent to work with. I'm a fan of using technology where it's possible. I think I need to be better at this laying out on paper, because I won't always have technology, or the stones will not be easily matched to, they may be 7.65 millimeters, and maybe I can get that well lit templated if I find the right tool. But I may just be working on the fly on something. So again, what I'm doing here, and I'm liking the results a lot better at this angle than my wide angle, is I'm using a combination of the barrette file and the round file to get this profile that I'm looking for out of the prongs, where I'm cutting in straight along the uprights, and then making that angled cut for the actual round file down at the bottom. And part of this practice is about how can we get better continuity from not just on each piece, from one piece to the other, but within the piece. I need better continuity on, for example, creating my prong shapes. They need to all look alike and be well measured. And this is definitely something I'm going to need more practice on. So I'm going to bring this over because it's interesting to see how a slight change of angle changes the visual that we're seeing here. So here's one of our big uglies from that first pass where I tried to correct, right? But then when we go at a slightly steeper angle, it becomes a lot more elegant on the cut, right? It flows down from the divot that I'm making with the round file, and it sort of leads its way up the side, whereas this gets kind of wide and clunky. And part of that is probably that this follows the angle of the whole piece better, whereas this sort of interrupts the angle. I had built a fairly steep angle into my wall, and this sort of is like splay-legged around it. So I don't like it as much as the narrower ones.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So this was me overfiling on the first two that I did to try and straighten things out, and it didn't do me justice. But let's pull the stone over just to see where we're headed with this. And I'm going to call this one, I'm not going any further, because it's just going to get uglier. But I want to see where we're landing with the stone. Fairly a little straightened out there. Come back here. So it's on the right path of a concept. And you can see we're going to have a bunch to trim away. That's again, because I think we've got that 0.5 and I would trim it back a ways so it's not so wide to start with, because I have all that excess prong material. And I'm liking when we hit just below the girdle. So I like where the intent of me going lower was a good one, in that I like how much of the stone shows in that more than I do here. This sort of hides the stone when it's up that high, but this is oh no, that is my messier one. So the steeper V is the one that I'm actually liking better, that shows a little more of the stone. So think about what is the peekaboo on the stone that you're putting in it, and how much are you cutting away relative to that? Does it look good below the girdle, or are you trying to get it so that it's just at the girdle line? Right. So I know, are there questions on my mangled prongs? You get at least the way to make the cone that you need for it, and some of the challenges that at least that you see me having. You may be able to get more meticulous than I am on that first pass. But our steps beyond this, let's assume that I had actually done a good job of getting all my 4 prongs laid out. Our steps would be to trim, once we finish sanding and filing everything, polish it all up, it would be to trim the prongs back down, similar to the heights we were talking about when we were doing prong pushovers from our basket settings, and marking the line the way that we did, that we are going to file or use a burr, depending on the width of your piece and how you can get your files in there. We're going to use that burr to get the little cutaway that we're going to fold over at the edge of the stone, so that we get a complete pushover once we do that. And then there's still the same kind of things, trimming out the top. Do we blunt them? Do we round them? Do we move them to a point? We have all those same kinds of choices we had with the prongs of the wire basket settings, as we do in this case.
I am curious about what you said. You said something about the angle.
The angle of how the stone looks relative to it, or the cut looks relative to it.
No, the cut, the way you put the cut in reference. Yeah, that.
Yeah, let me draw that big, because it is hard to see on this small scale what I'm seeing happen, and why I like one of the directions that I filed better. That one of the sections that I folks, that's not my drawing board. Here's my sanding board. That's my drawing board. Switch to this view. So dimensionally, and this is all of the, like, you guys are watching me discover my thoughts on this live. This is not stuff I've given a lot of consideration to, but it's me responding to what I'm seeing on the stone. So when we designed our original angle, we made something at whatever steepness we did, right? And when I cut away initially, I did something that ended up being wider than the angle. It didn't follow this angle neatly. And then these second ones that I've cut are following the angle a little bit more consistently. And that's what I say I think looks better.
So
Because
visually,
this
that's better.
has flow, right? It follows the line. Whereas this interrupts the eye. It sort of goes bleh, instead of the elegance of one of these taller settings. So that's what I'm responding to when I see one of my pair, the first pair that I cut wide is looking unnatural relative to the angle. And it makes sense that we would want lines that run. This is that whole, your eye sees something that's a small mistake more exaggeratedly than something that's a big mistake. So possibly if I went this way, it would look, way wider. It would look more intentional, but that middle kind of halfway, but not yet following these angles just feels wrong visually to me.
Yeah.
So I could also correct it by doing a shape like that instead, right?
Right.
in which case I'm not chasing angles. Or I could do something more intentionally squared. Although that feels sort of weirdly interrupting in a different way. I can do triangular. Any number of choices, it's just you, and this is a design choice, not a structural choice. So you guys are going to have to look at your own cut-ins. But what it tells me is I want to start with aiming for following the same angle, which ultimately would, you know, lead me down that point to the center of the piece. So wherever that stops, I want to sort of be following more of the existing angle, and then it's the difference of how much I carve away. Is that more of an explanation? Enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So for whatever reason, this one took me a lot longer than I anticipated. I did not realize we were already at 7. So we're definitely not going to set our marquee. And my next steps on the other one are going to be much better measuring of my layout. So I'm going to suggest that we pause there and do show and tell and call it a night. And next session will be, I will prep the better layout of the fancier version up to the point that we will cut off the bottom. So I'm going to do all the crenellation along the top neatly and mark out and measure out so that we have a good template. The cutaways that we're going to do, which are equivalent to what you see in section 6 on page 91. But we'll do that part on camera next session. And we will set the marquee and hopefully actually set, I'll probably redo this one that I am not happy with, so that we can do a setting of one of the basic crown settings, because that's a fairly quick set once we're in good shape. So, gang, thank you for your patience with me as I was sawing and filing and messing stuff up. That time flew on that one. I was not thinking we were as far along as we were. But that's what we learn when we practice new things. So
Yes.
anybody have stuff they want to show off that they've been working on? Anyone? Come on, gang. This is the part I live for. You got to give me stuff. You got to show me things. All right. Yeah. Is there anybody?
Well, I have something, but I already posted it.
Well, that's okay. Not everybody's on the Facebook group. You can show that gorgeous ring off again
Okay.
because it's impressive.
Oh, thank you.
So pair
know.
setting,
Oh,
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
step
Thank you.
bezel or shoulder bezel, I'm
Really
guessing.
nice.
Yeah, shoulder
Very nice.
bezel.
What kind of stone?
You know what? It's just a glass stone. I just wanted to practice. I don't know. Someone gave to me. People
Nice.
give me stuff, and I don't know what it is. And since I don't want to spend the money buying
love
something
the
until
color.
I learn. Thank you.
It's almost a London blue topaz from the looks of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
From
looks
that color
like it.
range.
Yeah.
But also I want to point out the point of her hair and how cleanly she transitioned down the angle of the front of the stone. Remember, we talked about that filing away so that it looks like a consistent thickness all the way around. Fantastic job on that.
Yeah.
Very nice. Now,
Thank
can you
you.
tell us, did you use the sawing and filing method where you were cutting down the point, or did you just push it down before you set other parts? Do you remember?
No, what I did was I had such a hard time setting it because
Yep.
I built, it's like I'm still learning. I had to build it,
Mhm.
the height.
Yep.
So it had 2 layers that I had to solder together. And when I did the bezel, I actually bought the bezel, the step bezel, because I found that when I made my own, it's still not good enough.
So you
I
mean
got
you bought the strip that is already stepped. Got it. Yeah.
yes.
Hell,
Yeah.
time savings. Go for it.
Yeah.
The
And
only
then-
challenge with it is you don't always have the height you need because it's only manufactured in certain heights.
True, but I always forget about the height. So
Yeah,
I just end up adding more silver on the bottom as a back plate is how I solve it.
all good.
And then, yeah, I put it on there and I was having a hard time making sure that the stone was flat and not crooked and the whole thing. And then I noticed the point and I remember what you had said and I filed it. That's all I did. I
Okay,
filed
so
it
you just-
before I put the stone in.
Before you put the stone in, great, okay. And so you were
Yeah.
able to push it down at the point. Sometimes even with the filing, there's so much metal right at the tip, but it looks like maybe that's not a terribly sharp point to the teardrop.
Yeah, it
So it's a soft
is.
curve, yeah,
No,
good.
it was a point. It was a point.
good, looks great,
Thank
nice
Beautiful.
you.
work.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I started, I
Yeah.
started cutting this is from the class.
Okay, beautiful.
I started
Look at that.
already. But if you're not careful, you cut more than what you were supposed to.
Uh-huh,
But
But-
I'm working on it and it looks clean.
yeah,
Mhm.
it looks beautiful. Had you done a regular step bezel in the teardrop in the pear shape before?
No,
Good. So that's,
Hello.
you hit several challenges with that.
yeah, but I really like it. I love it.
Yeah, it's looking
Yeah, Came out
fantastic.
nice.
And it looks like you started doing your shaping, the dimensional
Yes.
shaping on that side, which looks fabulous. So if
Yeah,
you hold it- if
but you have to
hold
be
it flat the way
precise.
that it'll rest on a piece for us. Hold,
I'm
hold
sorry?
it flat. Horizontally instead of vertically for us. There we go. So for those of you that weren't in this weekend's class, this is a technique where we're taking a traditional step bezel like we learned in chapter
There,
3
that's better,
and
right?
modifying it. Yeah, that looks great. So we're modifying it so that it looks like it has dimension.
My light is terrible. There,
That's-
see, I think that's
That's looking fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
okie dokie.
Yeah,
Nice
it's
work.
really beautiful.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to show anything off? All right, gang. Well, another night gone. So I didn't have my list of what I was going to do for next session, but I'm going to make notes that we're going to do the fancy version of the crown setting. And then we're going to set the basic version of the crown. And we're going to set the marquee basket from last session. And that is on the 16th. And then we have Thanksgiving and such. And I haven't even looked ahead to December to figure out, we'll probably end up canceling the one that's right before Christmas. I think that hits like 4 days before everybody's likely to be out. But I'll look ahead. I generally want to have at least a week before any major holiday. So the 16th puts us a week and a day before Thanksgiving. And then we'll go from there and we'll keep going into 2023. I had no sense of how long this was going to take when we started. When we get done with the ones that I've listed on for the 16th, then we're going back to baskets to do the dreaded emerald cut, which is actually less dreaded to me than the walled bezels for that, because you're working from the outside. And for some reason, I find it easier to cut those angles when I'm on the outside of the stone than when I'm cutting them to fold things in. So we'll see if that plays out better for me. And then there's only a couple other settings left in this chapter. And then we get to these chapters that are much shorter, but have some very specific tools to accomplish their settings. And so there'll be smaller runs in each chapter, but we'll keep chipping away, and I will try to get some break over some holiday time to get all of the Facebook guides a little more caught up with information about it. The last session is up on YouTube now. So session 18, this is session 19, and I've got a whole bunch of files I have to process before I get to this. So it's going to be probably at least 2 weeks before today's session goes up. Any questions? Any other things? All right,
Um,
gang.
Thank you.
I have a question about the
Sure.
pass. I noticed that you sent emails for next year. Is it gonna be the same password for, to get in? And
Do you
the
mean for
same
Rio
code?
or for the event? It should stay the same. I just extend it. They only let you put so many sessions in at once, but once you're in the middle of something, I can just extend it on. So yeah, I don't want everybody to have to re-register or anything, but I'll also continue to send out that reminder email. I finally figured out how to fake out Zoom so that it thinks that I have more on it. The big problem is that when you go into Zoom the normal way, it gives you like 8 people at a time. So I'd have to do 30 different send notices. And I figured out a way to get around that. So
Okay.
it's a little
okay.
easier for me to send the reminder notices than it was. I was going to give up on doing that after a while.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
sounds
I was very happy and surprised
That you got the reminder?
that we're doing it until next year.
Oh yeah, I'm doing it till this book is done. I don't know whether you guys are going to have the patience to hang out with me for that long, but I'm doing it until the book is done
Yes.
because I
Of
committed.
course, of
I
course.
Yeah,
committed.
yeah. But Rachel, in the meantime, more classes.
So yes, I'm going to probably, I try to schedule 3 to 5 classes a year because they take a lot out of me, frankly, on top of everything else I do. And I have to juggle which ones I'm doing for schools versus which ones I'm doing for myself. So guaranteed there will be a Hollow Forms class this coming year. There
Oh,
will
great.
probably be at least one variation of the clasps class. If there's interest again by next year, I'll probably do the bezels one towards the bezels less ordinary again at the end, towards the end of the year, so that anybody that's joined into this project later can sort of play catch up on it. And I'm sort of feeling like I need to find something else interesting that I want to cover. Oh, and I've got a live waxworking class in Portland that I'm doing. So there's probably going to be one more virtual class in there along the way. I just have to figure out my schedule because I haven't even figured out what all shows I'm applying to this coming year. So that's where I
It's a
am.
lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
There's a
you.
lot going on.
Thank
Thank you, Gammy.
you.
Always, as always,
you
sign
very
up for my
much.
mailing list and you'll get notices of such things as classes sooner. And about once a year, I do a special, hey, there's a discount code for you because you're on my mailing list. So
Cool.
if you want that extra stuff, make sure you sign up. Thanks, gang. Have a good one.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, Rachel.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.